My name is Jackson Haynes, and if you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with a group of people who mistake a clipboard for a badge and a petty ego for the law, you know exactly how quickly a dream can turn into a living nightmare. You spend half your life climbing the ladder, grinding through endless forms, and begging for a slice of peace and quiet, only to find out that the moment you finally plant your feet, there's always someone waiting in the wings, someone with a cheap vest, a camera, and a complete lack of a soul, ready to tell you that the ground you're standing on doesn't actually belong to you. I learned that lesson the hard way. Right on the day, I pulled into the driveway of what was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place tucked away in the mountains where the only rules were the ones the weather decided to enforce. It was one of those mornings that felt like it was ripped out of a travel brochure. Mist clinging to the pine needles, the sun just barely poking its head over the ridge, and that crisp, clean air you can only find when you're 30 minutes away from the nearest place to buy a gallon of gas. I had been dreaming of this for 20 years. I'd spent 2 decades working in construction, drowning in bureaucracy, dealing with architects who couldn't draw a straight line, and inspectors who lived to make my life miserable. I wanted out. I wanted a place that was mine, a place where I didn't have to answer to a committee of bored, over-medicated busybodies. My truck was loaded. My house, this beautiful, clean-lined, modern cabin, was sitting there waiting for me like a promise fulfilled. But then about 50 yards from the garage, the world hit a wall. Literally, there was a thick industrial-grade chain stretched tight between 2 metal posts across my drive. I slammed on the brakes, the moving truck behind me chirping its air brakes in protest, and for a second, I just sat there. I had done the walkthrough a week ago. There was no chain. There was no nonsense. But now, hanging off that chain like a middle finger to my life's work, was a sign: private community property. Access denied. Wheatspun pine HOA. I stared at the sign until my eyes burned. It didn't make sense. I'd paid nearly $1 million for this place. In cash. I had the deed in my glove box, and it didn't have a single mention of a homeowners association. It was a standalone parcel, completely independent. I stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, and that's when I saw them. 2 figures standing off to the side, looking like they were waiting for the curtain to rise. One guy was wearing an orange vest with an HOA logo and a GoPro strapped to his chest, looking like he was auditioning for some shitty true crime documentary. Beside him stood a woman, somewhere in her 50s, clutching a clipboard like it was the Holy Bible. She walked toward me, her pace measured and practiced. She had that look, the one that says she spent her entire afternoon imagining how she'd ruin my day. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with that artificial, customer service from hell tone. "This is a private community. Entry is restricted to approved residents and guests. Do you have proof of authorization?" I could feel the heat rising up the back of my neck. I kept my voice steady, though I'm sure my knuckles were turning white. "Look, I'm Jackson Haynes. I own that house. I closed on it 3 weeks ago. There is no HOA here. The title is clean. I'm going through that gate." She didn't even flinch. She just gave me this thin, tight-lipped smile that made me want to scream. "That property is currently under legal review, Mr. Haynes. Our association has claimed the parcel due to a deed discrepancy. Until that is resolved, you are not authorized to enter." A deed discrepancy? I had the paperwork in my dashboard. I knew exactly what I owned. But the guy with the GoPro was already stepping closer, that little red light on his camera blinking like a heartbeat. He wanted me to lose it. He wanted to catch a video of the aggressive new guy, so they could call the cops and make me look like the criminal. "Sir," she continued, "if you breach this gate, it will be considered trespassing. I strongly advise you to consult with your legal counsel before you make a mistake you'll regret." I didn't answer her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a debate. I just turned around, walked back to my truck, and reached into my toolbox. I pulled out my heavy-duty bolt cutters, the kind that don't care about your feelings or your HOA bylaws. I walked back to the gate, didn't say a word, and clamped down. Snap! The lock popped like a twig. I let the chain hit the ground with a loud, beautiful, metallic clang, looked at my driver, and gave him a nod. He rolled right through. I followed, and As I drove past those two clowns, I didn't even look back. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff. About 15 minutes later, the sheriff's deputy, Ron, pulled up. I liked Ron. He was a guy who cared about facts, not theater. He took one look at the chain lying on the ground, then looked over at the HOA representatives, who were now huddled together like conspirators in a bad play, and sighed. He was tired of them before he even started. Before Ron could say a word, a black Lexus came flying up the driveway, dust billowing behind it like a smokescreen. Out stepped Karen. Yeah, actually named Karen, and honestly the name fit like a glove. She was the president of this so-called association, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my first car and a blazer that looked like it had never touched actual work in its life. She marched over, waving a stack of papers. "Deputy," she called out, all fake authority. "I am here to formally assert the association's claim over this property. We acquired the lot through foreclosure from the previous owner." Ron looked at the papers, then looked at me, then looked back at her. "This deed is certified by the county, ma'am. This property isn't listed as part of your association. There's no legal record of your claim." She stuttered for a second, then doubled down. "We're in the middle of filing an update. We're working with the zoning board." "Until that's done," Ron said, his voice flat, "this is private property, and you're trespassing. You need to leave." The look she shot me was pure venom. "This isn't over, Haynes. The board will be filing a formal suit." I stood there, hands on my hips, and just watched her. "Do what you have to do, Karen. But unless you have a judge's order, you're off my land." That was supposed to be the end of it, right? Wrong. Dealing with people like that is like playing a game of whack-a-mole, where the moles have a bottomless budget for petty lawsuits. They filed an emergency injunction, claiming the previous owner had signed the place over to them for $1. It was so transparently fraudulent that my lawyer, Rachel, laughed for 5 minutes straight when she saw the filing. She was a bulldog, the kind of person who breathes metadata and eats document forgery for breakfast. "They didn't even try to make it look real," she told me. "The signatures don't match. The timestamps are off. This is a gift, Jackson." The judge threw it out within a week. You'd think that would be enough. But no, they were just getting started. When the legal path closed, they moved to harassment. They set up a community watch tent right on the edge of my property line. Every single day, a different person, usually some guy with too much time on his hands and a serious grudge, would sit there with a folding chair and a thermos, staring at my house like they were guarding a nuclear silo. It was weird. It was creepy. And then one morning, I woke up to find them installing a sign on my property, pending HOA dispute zone. That was it. I didn't just go to the sheriff this time. I started digging. I got in touch with a guy I used to know, John Melton, a surveyor who had seen it all. We remarked every inch of that property, put up new, heavy-duty survey stakes, and verified every corner with GPS precision. I was making a statement. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending the principle of owning your own life. But Karen, she was a special kind of persistent. When a surveyor didn't scare her off, she tried to use the county code enforcement. A week later, I had an officer knocking on my door, saying he'd received reports about illegal renovations and unpermitted surveillance equipment. I took him on a tour. I showed him everything. The house was perfect, the cameras were perfectly legal, and by the time we were done, the officer was apologizing for the time he'd wasted. The twist, though, came in the middle of the night on a Tuesday. My security system, which I had cranked up to professional grade by this point, picked up movement at the back fence. I sat in my office with the monitors pulled up, watching 3 figures in dark hoodies trying to cut through my perimeter with a cordless angle grinder. They were sweating, they were swearing, and they clearly had no idea they were being recorded in 4K resolution with night vision. I hit the floodlights, and they scrambled like cockroaches in a kitchen, but not before I got a crystal clear shot of one guy's face. It was Darren Crane. I knew that name. He was the husband of one of the board members. The next morning, I wasn't just mad, I was done. I took the footage, the police reports from the attempted break-in, and the documentation of the fraudulent deed to the sheriff's office. It wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a criminal conspiracy. They had forged documents, trespassed, attempted destruction of property, and spent months trying to intimidate me off my own land. When the case finally hit the courtroom, it was like watching a house of cards get hit by a wrecking ball. The prosecutor laid it all out. The fake signatures, the forged deed, the video of the husband cutting my fence, and the record of the threats. Karen didn't look like a high-powered HOA president then. She looked small. She looked like exactly what she was, a bully who thought she was smarter than the law. The judge didn't just rule in my favor. He eviscerated them. The HOA was ordered to dissolve immediately. The charges? They were severe. Karen ended up with a 17-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. I didn't feel bad for her for a single second. You don't get to try to ruin someone's life because you want their mountain view and think you're above the rules. 2 months later, the dust finally settled. The tent was gone. The watchers had disappeared back into whatever holes they crawled out of, and the silence was finally, truly mine. I took that chain, that stupid, heavy, ugly chain they tried to use to block me out, and I had it melted down. I had it reforged into a custom sign that sits right at the entrance of my driveway. It's clean, it's simple, and it's final. Private property. No HOA. No exceptions. Sometimes I sit on my deck and just listen to the wind moving through the pines. It's quiet. It's peaceful. And every once in a while, I think about that clipboard, that vest, and the way they looked at me on that first day, like I was the one who didn't belong. It's funny how the world works, isn't it? You fight long enough, you hold your ground hard enough, and eventually the truth catches up. You realize that the rules and the regulations are often just tools used by people who can't stand the idea of anyone else having a little bit of freedom. But it makes me wonder, how many people out there are still dealing with this? How many people are being bullied by these fake little empires, terrified to speak up or push back because they think the system is too big or too powerful? Because I can tell you this, the system isn't as solid as they want you to think it is. It's made of people, and people are flawed, and people can be wrong. Sometimes you have to be the one to break the chain. I don't know. Maybe there's a line between justice and just being stubborn, but I think in a world that tries so hard to categorize you and control you, holding your ground is the most important thing you can do. You pay for your life, you work for your space, and you don't let anyone, not a board, not a committee, not a person in a fancy blazer, take it away from you. So here I am, exactly where I wanted to be. No one is telling me what color to paint my house, no one is checking my guests at the gate, and no one is trying to sue me for the dirt I walk on. It was a hell of a fight, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't lose a little sleep along the way, but every morning when that sun hits the ridge, I know it was worth it. Now, I'm curious, have you ever had to deal with something like this? Maybe not a full-blown fraud case, but that feeling of being squeezed out or some authority figure try to make your life smaller, just because they can? What's your take on it? Is it always worth the fight, or is there a point where you just walk away to save your sanity? Drop a comment and let me know how you've handled it when the world tries to box you in. I want to hear your stories, the ones where you stood your ground, the ones where you realized it was time to move on, or maybe just the ones that make you realize that the most important property you own is your own sense of what's right. Let's talk about it.